2016's Batman vs. Superman Dawn of Justice was a divisive film would be like saying the Bismarck was in a bit of trouble after its rudder got struck by that dive bomber, and it was forced to basically steam around in circles. This I've never seen a film divide a fan base like this. At least I wouldn't see a film do this until last year's The Last Jedi and seeing what it's done to Star Wars fandom. But before that, I could not name you a film that divided a fan base so much. On the one hand, you had some people praising it as a great work of art and one of the greatest achievements in the superhero film genre, if not the greatest, and saying that it was simply too smart of a film for most people to understand, and it was simply too adult. On the other hand, you had people calling it childish nonsense. Me? When I saw it, I gave it an initial review of 5 out of 10. However, watching it on home video several times caused my opinion to continually decline until I was giving it a 2 out of 10. It was a bunch of garbled nonsense and just filled with plot lines that go nowhere, over the top performances that don't fit the characters. Most notably Jesse Eisenberg playing a Lex Luthor and he seems to be in some parts of scenes basically doing a ripoff of Heath Ledger's performance as the Joker in The Dark Knight, which isn't Lex Luthor. I don't care if you call him Lex Luthor Jr. or whatever. If you're putting him in a film with Superman, Lex Luthor is suave, cold, and calculating, and he's an expert manipulator of people. At least he has been since John Byrne rebooted him in his original Man of Steel miniseries, and subsequently in Superman in Action Comics after Crisis on Infinite Earths in 1985. So, for all my life, Lex Luthor has been a suave, calculated businessman whose greatest defense against Superman isn't kryptonite or even brute strength, but the fact that he can manipulate people, and the fact that he manages to project himself as someone who people would think Superman or anybody who accused him of doing anything dirty was crazy for, and he knows how to use litigation. Plus, you have him still being being probably the most brilliant scientist on Earth, and having the only corporation that can be a rival to Wayne Enterprises, and you've got the ultimate, arch nemesis for Superman. But that was all lost in what we got at the theatrical cut. Now, later on, we got the ultimate version on Blu-ray, and just FYI, that I felt was better. It definitely filled in some of the plot holes, but you had to slog through nearly 3 hours, and there was still a lot of nonsense and a lot of character motivations left unexplained. And I still insist that Batman, in any cut of this movie, I insist that Batman does not act like Batman at all. For one thing, every piece of evidence he finds in this movie points to Lex Luthor as being the villain, and as being the one who's a danger to everyone on Earth. And you start off the fight between him and Superman with Superman coming down and saying, "I was wrong." Lex is trying to, and yet then he still attacks Superman? No. Batman is a cold, calculating detective. He's not driven by rage. He isn't. that's what separates him from many of his villains, and so the movie still makes Batman out to be very villainous. Compare this to that same year's Captain America: Civil War, where I've heard convincing arguments on both sides for whether Captain America or Iron Man's team was in the right on there, and you actually have some expert manipulating going on, and you have it being clear throughout the movie that neither side wants to fight the other, but they will because they think that it's the right thing to do, and it's the only way to stop more loss of life later. So yeah, even with the extended cut, the movie was still a mess. The extended cut is better, and I agree with everyone who says this should have been the cut in theaters. In fact, Warner Bros. Might not have taken such a bath on the movie if they hadn't. If they hadn't insisted on cutting it as close as they could to 2 hours. Same thing with Justice League. From what I can see, from what we have of the deleted scenes, it looks like it would have been a much more complete movie if they had just let it go on. But it still can feel like a drag because it's still not a very good movie, and it's still unfocused and has tons of plot lines that went nowhere. Also, the problem is it only intensified when Justice League came out. Justice League, the way it represents Superman and how the world reacted to his death, and even his relationship with Batman, just doesn't reflect what is seen in Batman vs. Superman: Dawn of Justice, either cut. So you have yeah, if anything, the sequel made the problems worse, and the sequel had the exact same problem for the most part that this one had, in that it was never going to be a great movie. Now I don't believe in dumping on Snyder for this, because in all his movies, he never got to make the movie that he was initially planning to make. Yeah, you had studio interference assisting on all sorts of things and product placement and stuff in Man of Steel. Then in this one, it gets even worse. The studio came in and insisted that he do Batman vs. Superman. And then they told him he could make it a 3-hour epic movie. Now, the reason why I say them just insisting that he make this is, yes, he did have a plan. They started out with a plan. As far as I can tell, he and Christopher Nolan did have a plan. From everything I've seen looking up behind the scenes on this movie, he and Christopher Nolan did have a plan. They hadn't worked out every detail, but they did have a plan for their cinematic universe. And it was to start off with a Superman movie, then do a Superman sequel, then do a Batman solo film, then do a Batman vs. Superman movie that would feature them becoming friends, then do another Superman movie where he would die, and then Justice League. The studio, which was now trying to play catch up with Marvel, said, screw all that. You could just do Batman vs. Superman. And thus, a lot of stuff that he was going to put in the Superman sequel and Batman versus and the first Batman movie got shoved into this as subplots. And he also had to set up Justice League, as they also declared that the very next movie had to be Justice League. And you had them telling him that Superman had to be brought back to life in Justice League. And we already had the cast list for Justice League, so Superman's death would lack any dramatic impact. And he had to introduce Wonder Woman and the rest of the Justice League somehow. So no, this was always going to be a jumbled mess of a film. I don't know any filmmaker who could take all these disparate demands that are being made by different executives that came in at the last minute and make a really good film out of it. I mean, they kept moving the goalpost and changing what he had to include. The script was constantly being rewritten while shot. How are you supposed to plan for that, let alone put a cinematic universe together? But all this has been covered in depth by people other than I. In fact, I probably spent too much time on it already. But the one bright spot was the only bright spot really in the whole film was Gal Gadot's introduction as Wonder Woman. I was personally against her casting, but throughout this movie and then her subsequent solo film, she won me over. So and I walked away from this movie going, well, that was pretty bad, but at least Wonder Woman was good, really good. And she is exactly the type of person DC needs as a goodwill ambassador for this film. She comes off as a nice, normal person, and she doesn't have time for politics or anything. She doesn't badmouth affairs. She doesn't talk. If people bring up the politics surrounding comic books and their movies, she doesn't get involved. She just talks about playing the part or makes a joke or something. And yeah, so is it any wonder they studios seem to have wanted Ben Affleck to become the face of this franchise, but it's not a surprise to me after seeing this movie. I wasn't surprised when after her solo film they started making her more of a face of the franchise, since she's come off the best of anyone who's been involved with this franchise so far. But anyway, I'm getting beside the point. The fact is, online there is a cut called the No Justice cut. This is a fan edit. That means it's a video file you download and you play on a media player in your home that can play MP4s, or you burn it to a DVD or Blu-ray disc, and then you can watch it. However, disclaimer here, do not do this if you do not own the Ultimate Cut of Batman vs. Superman. I'll have a link to where you can buy the Ultimate Cut of Batman vs. Superman in this video's description. So, the No Justice cut cuts the movie down to just under 2 hours. It now runs instead of 2 hours 45 minutes for the Ultimate Cut, or 2 hours 15 minutes for the theatrical cut. It now runs at a slim 1 hour and 45 minutes. Now you may think, wait a second, if the problem was that they cut out too many scenes and it was all rushed before in the 2 hour 15-minute cut, and they still didn't solve everything with the 2 hour 45-minute cut, how on earth does having a 1 hour 15-minute cut help things? Well, here's the thing. The movie is re-edited in such a way to make people's actions make more sense, and to streamline it so that there's no mention of the Justice League. This keeps the focus strictly on Batman and Superman's relationship and Lex Luthor as a cold, calculating villain. Basically, the movie goes through and it removes everything, even Wonder Woman. Okay, so the best part of the movie is kind of removed, but in its place, you get something that isn't as long. It doesn't feel like a slog, and people's actions make more sense. For instance, Clark Kent now hears stories about Batman acting more violent. It now makes it clear that what's prompting Clark Kent to do anti-Batman pieces is that the level of violence Batman is practicing is well above what he had typically practiced. They now make it clear that this Batman has been around for a while, but he's never been this violent before. But the movie also takes some of the emphasis away from some of the more brutal violence, and Batman isn't as reckless with people's lives in this one as he is. Those are cut out. Also, near the beginning, the scene that everyone has mocked, where Bruce has to call on the telephone the guy in charge of his office building in Metropolis while it's under attack by Zod, and tell him to get everybody out, and he hasn't even begun everybody evacuating, and he just stands there going, "What? Oh, yeah," and he acts like he hasn't noticed anything. That's cut down. It's not completely done, but what this movie does do is it makes it so Bruce Wayne can't get a hold of him. The phone lines are down. It's re-edited in such a way so that the phone lines are down, and then in very quick order, the building is just wiped out on the guy, and it also cuts it in such a way so that it makes it clear that he's the only person in the building at that time. So apparently he's the lone person. So now it makes a little more sense in that this cut he comes off as the lone person standing there, who was staying with the building to make sure nothing happened to it, or maybe he was or maybe he was about to leave and he got interrupted. Basically, it cuts out a lot of the dead time in that makes you wonder, why was he still standing on the top floor instead of getting out of the building? So it helps with that. There are all sorts of and there are all sorts of little things like that it changes. That I'm not going to go over them all one by one, but basically it does a lot to help. Like, for instance, Lex Luthor now comes off mostly as cold and calculating, and you don't wonder why somebody would give him access to national security secrets, because he's, sexually shoving Jolly Ranchers in people's mouth and cackling and going on insane monologues that mean nothing. Instead, the most eccentric thing about him is just that he's a billionaire and he has a basketball court where he plays apparently on his lunch break. Nothing that would raise any red flags, and he's very concerned about aliens. And now Lex Luthor becomes somebody who's just can't stand that somebody other than him is moved in, that is more powerful than him, and who people like more. That he basically can't stand that he's no longer the hero. So his motivations make a little more sense. And it also comes off as not being stupid. And it makes the senator smarter. It doesn't come off as everybody else is being stupid now. It makes the senator that he murders a real threat to him. It makes it so that well, you can see how he's pulled the wool over everyone's eyes, but she's smart enough to see through his garbage. And that's something that is very interesting to see. And then you have things like they add a Joker's laugh when Batman is looking at some trophies, or looking at a damaged suit of some kind that he's in the Batcave. Basically what I took away, and what I think for the website, what that implies to me is that a death in the family may have been a fairly recent event, and that accounts for Batman's uncharacteristic paranoia and anger and a level of violence that he's using. He's just had Robin murdered by the Joker because he wasn't in his mind doing what's necessary, and now he's second guessing his vow never to kill. He's basically second guessing that, and he's not taking any chance with the threat, and it gives him tunnel vision to Lex Luthor. It's little things like that, little changes like that help this movie move along. Now, and it's very well edited together. At no point could I tell that this wasn't how the film was originally edited, with originally seeing it. If I had seen this edit on its own, I would think that this was the way it was always edited together. So, and it comes together nicely. You have a nice quick film with the essential character interactions where Lex Luthor attempts to frame Superman, but nobody is really fooled. Lois Lane uncovers it. The government and the news quickly figure out that it was a frame job. Superman doesn't run away from helping people anymore. and basically you have it. The only reason Lex was able to get away with this is because Batman has tunnel vision, because Robin was just murdered by the Joker, and He's sort of fixated on one thing, and Superman isn't just being a hypocrite here. Superman killed Zod in the last movie when he had no other choice to save a family. And here he just sees Batman putting brands on people that mark them for death, and just the city of Gotham now being afraid of a man who has been its protector for about 2 decades. And he doesn't know why. So he's just telling him it's time to hang it up. He thinks that the stress. Basically, it comes off now that Superman thinks Batman. Basically, the scene where Superman first confronts Batman with the Batmobile, it basically comes off as Superman saw Batman now firing frickin' machine guns at people and explosives, and he's like, okay, something's gotten to him, and he's obviously going too far. So, and it comes off as basically him saying, stop. You have to stop. This is unacceptable. And it comes more from a place of moral effort because he knows that once you cross that line, you don't want to cross again, and he knows that Batman can't be allowed to cross this line because he already knows that people question him because of what he did. And anyway, there is no doomsday or anything else. So it's just a straightforward plot of two men who have come not to trust somebody who come not to trust anything more powerful than them. Who one through ego and one through grief have come to the conclusion that they can't accept anybody being more powerful than them, and they respond violently. Lex by setting up Superman to be killed, and Batman by being the pawn in this game, and it makes sort of Lex a dark mirror image of what Batman could become. But in the end, the movie ends with Superman being weakened by the kryptonite to such an extent that he can't go save his mother. And yes, the Martha scene is still there. And yes, it still doesn't really work and get through. It's still heavy-handed, and I still don't understand why Batman, if thought he was such a threat and he was willing to kill him a second ago, I've heard the explanation that no, he sees him as human. No, but he saw him as a threat before to all life on the planet. That's the reason why he was trying to murder him. So why on earth would seeing him as human change that? There hasn't been anything that's happened to make Superman less of a threat. He hasn't lost any of his powers. So that scene still doesn't work. Yeah, it still has some of the messier parts of the plot, of course. You can't change what movie this is. But it now becomes a movie where Superman and Batman fight, and then Batman has hurt Superman. Batman learns that he can't give in to the temptation that he was giving into after the death of Robin, and he goes off and rescues Superman's mother because Superman can't. And they're friends at the end, and that stupid tub scene, it actually kind of works here because it's moved so that it's used to establish Superman still being alive at the end of the movie, and the whole conversation, the whole thing of it being interrupted is part of a montage now, and the whole thing of it interrupting a serious discussion doesn't happen. Also, this gets rid of another problem I had. One, when Justice League came out, is it gets rid of two problems, actually, that I had with Justice League as a follow-up to this movie. And to me, this cut works better with Justice League than even the Ultimate Cut. You want to know why? Because in the Ultimate Cut, they talked about how long Superman had been around, and they basically talked about him as though the Earth had come to depend on Superman being around. And as if he was well loved and there were no protests around him. But we didn't see that in Batman versus Superman or Man of Steel. We saw that every action Superman took was controversial and drew some hate from some crowd or other, and he wasn't around long enough, and he and Batman knew each other for like, you know, a, for like 20 minutes. And yet Batman is so broken up in Justice League that his old friend is dead, and he's like, Superman should really be leading this team, and he's like really bummed out that, you know, Clark is dead. He's talking about him as Clark, and he's like, as if they really knew each other and they have been hanging out. Well, here's the thing. First of all, by leaving Superman alive, it now makes Justice League take place an indeterminate amount of time after Batman versus Superman. I would tend to place Justice League, say that Justice League takes place now after the No Justice cut, 5 to 10 years after the No Justice cut of Batman versus Superman. With that interim, you can believe that Superman went on to win the public's trust. He and Batman worked together for years, and they became buddies like in the comics. And then somewhere at some point off screen, Superman was killed, and in some epic battle, and then that puts Bruce on the outs again. He doesn't give in to rage like he did the last time. Instead, he now has an example to follow, and now the second time he's lost somebody in his fight for justice, he knows to lean on other people and get help, and not flip out. And turning to Wonder Woman as part of his support system makes perfect sense. So, to me, the movies sync up a lot better now as a series with this cut of the Batman versus Superman. Then you have another way that they link up, and I admit this is nitpicky, but at the end of Batman versus Superman, he talks to Diana, he talks to Wonder Woman about Batman does about putting together the Justice League. Then Joss Whedon decided to give Justice League the exact same ending as Batman vs. Superman, where they're talking about putting together the Justice League and acting like this is a brand new idea. And I'm like, you had that idea 2 years ago. What? I thought that's what you were working on for 2 years. Now you're ending this by bringing up the idea of a group of superheroes working together as though it's new. What? So that caused me to tilt my... That was another head tilting moment that caused me to go, huh? With Justice League. That is now gone in this, because there is no setup for Justice League. This is a standalone movie. You can watch it without watching Man of Steel now. So yeah, as a fan edit, I give this 10 out of 10. As a fan edit. As a re-edit of the movie, for all the hard work that went into it and all the smart decisions that went into making it. Now, as an overall film, well, it still has a lot of the problems. You can't edit away all of the problems from Batman versus Superman Dawn of Justice. However, I'm going to end this review by showing you a clip of what they did with Lex Luthor to make him a character you could take seriously. And I think you'll agree that it is mitigated a lot. So, overall, the film, I'm giving a 5.5 out of 10. For the workmanship that went into it, I'm giving a 10 out of 10. This is definitely the best edit of this movie you will find. So, buy the Ultimate Cut, but watch this version. If you're going to watch any version, buy the Ultimate Cut and then watch this one. Alright? So, hope you found this enlightening, and yeah, I'll end this by showing you what they did with Lex in this movie. See you next time.